Coming to the next important literary figure of American literature, who is Emily Dickinson. Here we shall cover an understanding of some of the most significant poems of Emily Dickinson. Her work is often cryptic in thought and unmelodious in expression. Almost all of her poems are written in short measures, in which the effect of curt brevity is increased by her verbal penuriousness. Compression and epigrammatical ambush are her aids. She proceeds without preparation or apology, by sudden sharp zigzags. What intelligence a reader has must be exercised in the poetic game of hare and hounds, where ellipses, inversions, and unexpected climaxes mislead those who pursue sweet reasonableness. If all her poems were of this sort, there would be nothing more to say. But such poems are exceptions. The poems taken in their entirety are a surprising and impressive revelation of poetic attitude and of poetic method in registering spiritual experiences. To the general reader, many of the poems seem uninspired, imperfect, crude, while to the student of the psychology of literary art, they offer most stimulating material for examination, because they enable one to penetrate into poetic origins, into radical creative energy. To gratify the aesthetic sense was never Emily Dickinson's desire. She despised the poppy and mandragora of felicitous phrases which lull the spirit to apathy and emphasize art for art's sake. Poetry to her was the expression of vital meanings, the transfer of passionate feeling and of deep conviction. Her work is essentially lyric. It lacks the slow, retreating harmonies of epic measures. It does not seek to present leisurely details of any sort. Its purpose is to objectify the swiftly passing moments and to give them poignant expression. The secret of Emily Dickinson's wayward power seems to lie in three special characteristics. The first of which is her intensity of spiritual experience. Hers is a record of a soul endowed with unceasing activity in a world not material, but one where concrete facts are the cherished revelation of divine significances. Inquisitive always, alert to the inner truths of life, impatient of the brief destinies of convention. She isolated herself from the petty demands of social amenity. A sort of tireless, probing energy of mental action absorbed her. Yet there is a little speculation of a purely philosophical sort in her poetry. Her stubborn beliefs, learned in childhood, persisted to the end. Her conviction that life is beauty, that love explains grief, and that immortality endures. The quality of her writing is profoundly stirring, because it betrays not the intellectual pioneer, but the acutely observant woman, whose capacity for feeling was profound. Her absorption in the world of feeling found some relief in associations with nature. Yet although she loved nature and wrote many nature lyrics, her interpretations are always more or less swayed by her own state of being. The colors, the fragrances, the forms of the material world meant to her a divine symbolism. But the spectacle of nature had in her eyes a more fugitive glory, a lesser consolation than it had for Wordsworth and other true lovers of the earth. It is essentially in the world of spiritual forces that her depths of poetic originality is shown. Others may have described nature, but few can describe life as she does. Human nature, the experiences of the world of souls, was a special study, to which she brought, in addition to that quality of intensity, a second characteristic, keen sensitiveness to irony and paradox. Nearly all her perceptions are tinged with penetrating sense of the contrasts in human vicissitude. Controlled, alert, expectant, aware of the perpetual compromise between clay and spirit, she accepted the inscrutable truths of life in a fashion which reveals how humor and pathos contend in her. It is this which gives her style those sudden turns and that startling imagery. Humor is not perhaps a characteristic associated with pure lyric poetry, and yet Emily's transcendental humor is one of the deep sources of her supremacy. Both in thought and in expression, she gains her piercing quality, her undeniable spiritual thrust by this gift, stimulating, mystifying, but forever inspiring her readers to a profound conception of high destinies. The most apparent instances of this keen, shrewd delight in challenging convention, in the effort to establish, through contrast, reconcilement of the earthly and the eternal, are to be found in her imagery. Although her similes and metaphors may be devoid of languid aesthetic elegance, they are quivering to express living ideas, and so they come surprisingly close to what we are fond of calling the commonplace. She reverses the usual, she hitches her star to a wagon, transfixing homely daily phrases for poetic purposes. Such an audacity has seldom invaded poetry with the desire to tell immortal truths through the medium of a deep sentiment for old habitual things. It is true that we permit this liberty to the greatest poets, viz. Shakespeare, Keats, Wordsworth, and some others. But in America, our poets have been sharply charged not to offend in this respect. To introduce, Emily Dickinson led a more self-secluded life in Amherst, Massachusetts. There is no wonder that as she is preoccupied with the plight of an individual, especially a woman brought up in New England, death and immortality are two major preoccupations in the sombre world created by her. Solitude and introversion are two other preconceptions or preoccupations of the poet, who published only 7 poems in her life, that too anonymously. Her poems have also been described as her letters to the world. As she did not give titles to her poems, they are remembered either through the first line of the poem or through the numbers allotted to them in Thomas H. Johnson's standard edition of the poems of Emily Dickinson. The poems that would be focused here are The Soul Selects Her Own Society, I Am Saying Every Day, It Would Never Be Common More I Said, Number 4, I Measure Every Grief I Meet, Because I Could Not Stop for Death is number 5. Number 6, My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun. And last, Rearrange a Wife's Affection. The willingness to look with clear directness at the spectacle of life is observable everywhere in her work. Passionate fortitude was hers, and this is the greatest contribution her poetry makes to the reading world. It is not expressed precisely in single poem, but rather is present in all, as key and interpretation of her meditative scrutiny. Without elaborate philosophy, yet with irresistible ways of expression, Emily Dickinson's poems have true lyric appeal, because they make abstractions such as love, hope, loneliness, death, and immortality seem near and intimate and faithful. She looked at existence with a vision so exalted and secure that the reader is long dominated by that very excess of spiritual conviction. A poet in the deeper mystic qualities of feeling rather than in the external merit of precise rhymes and flawless art. Coming to the first poem, The Soul Selects Her Own Society, which is numbered as 303. Emily Dickinson's The Soul Selects Her Own Society was first published posthumously in the year 1890. long before Dickinson wrote the poem in 1862. In this poem, the speaker celebrates the virtues of an independent and mostly solitary life. The speaker envisions her soul as a queenly figure who chooses her company carefully, without regard for worldly status or prestige. The poem's innovative use of slant rhyme and meter sets it apart from contemporary poetic standards. Like the soul it describes, this poem obeys only its own rules. In the poem, a speaker justifies her decision to lead a mostly solitary life. The speaker argues that the soul, functioning here as a kind of stand-in for the speaker herself, naturally rejects the outside world in favor of her own inner circle. In doing so, the speaker champions individuality and self-reliance in a society that often values neither of these qualities. The speaker begins by claiming that the soul selects her own society. In other words, that the soul chooses its own companions. These companions could be actual people or a metaphor for the speaker's thoughts. In either case, the soul then shuts the door in the face of her divine majority, closing herself off from anyone not in this inner circle, no matter how divine. By casting out the majority of people and ideas, no matter how important they might seem, the speaker chooses a life of relative solitude. On a metaphorical level, the act of choosing one from an ample nation could also be an image of the creative process. The soul might be just as idiosyncratically selective about the ideas that catch her fancy as the people. In either reading, the speaker demonstrates her strong sense of independence and her ability to thrive according to her own rules. Overall, then, the speaker celebrates the capacity for self-reliance in a society that often values more public virtues like status, wealth, and power. Unmoved by these values, the speaker is free to embrace the strength and pleasure of her own tastes and preferences. There might be a downside to the self-reliance. Some readers might take the fact that the speaker closes herself off like stone to mean that she is little too rigid and unyielding in her refusal to engage with the outside world. Then again, maybe she is simply secure in her convictions. And by describing the soul as a separate being from herself, perhaps the speaker shields herself from seeming a little too much, like stone to the uncomprehending world. This, as she seems to say, is just the way the soul behaves. Don't look at me. Sharing a few lines from the poem, the soul selects her own society, then shuts the door. To her divine majority, presents no more. Unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I have known her from an ample nation. Choose one, then close the walls of her attention like stone. Coming to the second poem of Emily Dickinson, I Am Saying Every Day, numbered 373. And another drama unfolds vividly in this poem. The narrator R says that if she becomes a queen the other day, she will do it in her own way. That is, in her own style. She will decorate herself a little. She will also find that she is not an ordinary person. She has become a Bourbon. Nobody will be able to treat her superciliously. That is with cold disdain. Nobody will be able to say that the day before she was a beggar in the market. People say that the court is a grand, stately place. She will be able to mix and mingle with the majesty. Who is the majesty, the king or God? She will also feel that her rank has risen high. She can sing a song to please the majesty. Her life may be brief, but she will mix and mingle with the majesty. There will be no cricket in the meadow, and no bee will be able to equal her accent. She feels that must be ready for the change, for the transformation. And she is ready. She does not want to meet the majesty in her old gown. She also does not want to be deemed a rustic, an uncivilized, barbarous fellow. Sharing a few lines on twigs of singing rather high, but this might be my brief term to qualify. Put from my simple speech all plain word. Take other accents, as such I heard, though but for the cricket, just, and but for the bee, and not in all the meadow. One accost me, better to be ready than did next moan. Meet me in Aragon, my old gown on, and the surprised air rustics wear, summoned unexpectedly to Exeter. I am saying every day, if I should be a queen tomorrow, I'd do this way, and so I deck a little, if it be I wake a Bourbon. None on me bend supercilious. With this was she begged in the marketplace yesterday. Court is a stately place, I have heard men say, so I loop my apron against the majesty, with bright pins of buttercup, that not too plain rank overtake me and perch my tongue. Coming to the third poem of Emily Dickinson, It Would Never Be Common More I Said, numbered 430. In this poem, difference is celebrated. The narrator I says that her plight is not common. She is extraordinary. She is unique. She is different from everyone. It is morning. The narrator has been in bliss. She has had much joy. There has been a red glow upon her cheeks. There has been a red glow in her eyes as well. She has no need to speak. It is so eloquent, so palpable. She has been walking as if she had wings. Her feet have been as unnecessary to her as boots will be for birds. She has also been bubbling, bursting with joy. She has been giving to love every creature she met. She has been showering gifts on the whole world. Suddenly everything changes for worse. She loses her riches, her wealth. There is a goblin who deprives her of all wealth, of warmth and of all joy. Something fearful happens to her palace. She becomes a beggar. She tries to hold on to sounds. She gropes after shapes. She feels wilderness all around her. Her golden lines are wiped out. She is able to see sackcloths hanging upon the mail. She begins to wonder where her India-made brocade is. That is her riches, her wealth. Stating a few lines, it would never be common, more I said. Difference had begun, many a bitterness had been, but that old sort was done. Or if it sometime showed, as it will, upon the downiest morn, such bliss had I for all the years. It would give an easier pain. I had so much joy, I told it, red upon my simple cheek. I felt it publish in my eye. It was needless any speak. I walked as wings my body bore. The feet I former used, unnecessary now to me, as boots would be to birds. I put my pleasure all abroad. I dealt a word of gold to every creature that I met, and dowered all the world. When suddenly my riches shrank, a goblin drank my dew, my palaces dropped tenantless, myself was beggared too. I clutched at sounds, I groped at shapes, I touched the tops of films, I felt the wilderness roll back along my golden lines. The sackcloth hangs upon the nail, the frock I used to wear, but where my moment of brocade, my drop of India. Coming to the fourth poem, I measure every grief I meet, numbered 561. I measure every grief I meet. One of Emily Dickinson's longest poems is a meditation on the nature of grief. The poem's speaker finds herself searching other people's grief for similarities to her own. She wonders about the weight or difficulty of other people's pain and whether such pain ever subsides. Knowing that someone out there might suffer as she does provides some comfort, making her feel less alone. The first known manuscript in which the poem appeared is dated 1862. Like most of Dickinson's poems, it was published posthumously. The speaker here can't help but compare everyone else's suffering to her own. She wonders if other people's grief is somehow heavier or lighter, whether it eases with time or what its origins are. While the speaker ultimately concedes that she can't truly know anything about anyone else's grief, the simple knowledge that others may suffer as she does helps her feel a little less alone. In this way, the poem suggests that grief is at once deeply personal and an experience that binds people together. Deep down, the speaker recognizes that she cannot really understand what anyone else is going through. There are many sources of grief, she observes, from the experience of constant cold to a harder to define despair. Though she can't help but compare others' grief to her own, she acknowledges that grief comes in too many forms to allow accurate measuring. No matter how hard she tries, she can never guess the kind of pain someone else is suffering. She can only imagine it based on her own experiences. Still, by imagining other people's suffering, the speaker gains piercing comfort. Even if she can't grasp the exact nature of others' pain, just knowing that others experience pain at all makes her feel poignantly connected to them. She goes so far as to imagine passing Calvary, Calvary being the site of Christ's crucifixion or a representation of that event. So she quite imagines how to pass this Calvary or passing Calvary, as to quote. Other people's suffering reminds her of Jesus' suffering for humankind, which helps her find some kind of meaning in her own suffering. In other words, pain connects her to others and maybe even to something divine. As unknowable as others' grief may be, she finds consolation in imagining that some people's grief is like her own. To state the lines, I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long or did it just begin. I could not tell the date of mine. It feels so old a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live and if they have to try and whether could they choose between it would not be to die. I note that some, gone patient long, at length renew their smile, an imitation of a light that has so little oil. There is grief of want and grief of cold, a sort they call despair. There is banishment from native eyes in sight of native air. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary. To note the fashions of the cross and how they are mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own.